Hello, this is Cindy Gomez-Schempp with the People's Press Project. We are coming to you today with a podcast about immigration. This is our 6th podcast, and today's topic is going to be travel. This is a pretty important topic. There's a lot of issues to navigate. Once again, I am here with Anna Stenson, immigration attorney from Fargo, and I'm going to welcome Anna and talk about this travel podcast. But first, we have some kind of exciting news.
We do.
We're going to hold a town hall meeting, and this will enable folks to come and ask Anna some questions.
Yes.
Kind of like you can get some pro bono advice. But in addition to this, we will have a full panel of people discussing the topic of immigration, and specifically around President Obama's recent announcement of relief programs that stop deportations for certain people, prioritizing the deportation of others. And also really sending a message that there is a priority in this country for certain types of immigrants to be removed versus others. So we are holding a town hall meeting. We want to invite everybody that's listening to come. It's going to be on March 20th at 3 o'clock. It goes from 3 to 5 p.m. We will be at the Job Service Office in Fargo. That's located at 1350 32nd Street South. And on our panel, we are going to have Pastor Peter Schmidt, who is an immigration advocate and longtime pastor at Faith Lutheran Church. Julie Nagby II, who is a dreamer of Liberian descent, whose deportation was halted and is now a National Dream U.S. Scholarship Award recipient and student. We will also have Barry Nelson, who is a community activist, formerly with Lutheran Social Services Refugee Resettlement Program, and a charter member of the North Dakota Human Rights Coalition Board. I will also be on the panel, your humble servant from the Media Justice Organization, the People's Press Project. And of course, we will have our guest today, Anna Marie Stenson. Thank you again for helping us and helping us understand these new programs available through immigration.
Well, thank you for having me back.
So, first of all, today's topic is travel. I didn't even know one could travel if one was undocumented.
Well, you shouldn't be traveling outside of the U.S., and even here, traveling within the U.S. can cause problems in and of itself as well.
So, wow. If you are an undocumented person, according to some of the notes that I saw for today, it's really a precarious situation. You could be jeopardizing your status. You could be jeopardizing getting deported. You could be jeopardizing your application for one of these programs.
Yes, there's a lot of things that all come into play, especially as we're waiting for that expanded DACA and the DAPA program so that you can even file.
Right. And there's a problem. Let's just back up a minute. We're going to have to back up a little bit further and talk about the lawsuit.
Yes, kind of, the last time we talked, there had been 26 states, including the state of Texas, had filed lawsuit against President Obama.
Republicans.
Trying to stop the implementation of the extended DACA and DAPA program. And a couple weeks after that, the federal district judge in Texas did put a halt injunction on having the DACA and DAPA program going forward. So at this point in time, no one can apply for any of these programs and everything is kind of halted. However, after that, President Obama did request that stop injunction be lifted to allow the program to go forward. So that's kind of where we're at now. There is going to be a court hearing on some of these issues and legal motions that are going on, and that's going to be March 19th, and so we're probably not going to hear anything new until after that date. So right now, everything's on hold, but don't panic. We've kind of been reminding time to gather documents, save money, time to figure out if you're going to have any problems with this.
Right, because legal experts like yourself have already looked at this issue and they anticipate it will be resolved. It's not something about, it's not so much if, it's more like when.
Yep, it's more of a matter of when are we going to be able to file these applications.
But it is expected that the process will open up, so once again, folks, don't panic. We're just in the kind of waiting game right now.
Yes. And the other important thing is, to hang tight and make sure that you're getting good advice, because everything is going to be changing at different times. And we're starting to learn of different scams. One of our earlier podcasts, we talked about scams that are targeting people who are filing taxes.
Right.
Well, the most recent scam is individuals posing as ICE detention officers, calling people and saying, well, there's a problem with your immigration status. If you send us money, we'll fix your immigration status.
Right.
Well, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, they're never going to call you, and they're not going to call you and ask for money. So
they don't ask for money over the phone like telemarketers.
No, they don't. And if somebody is calling you and you didn't call them, that key number one. And if they're asking for money, that key number two, that that this might be a scam. And so even immigration and ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, is telling people this is a scam. This is not us. And
people should watch out for those types of scams and spread the word to each other.
Yep, and that's kind of we kind of started with the new things, and it seems like every week there's something new and different that's happening in terms of trying to tell people something that's not true.
Wow, that's scary. So folks, beware, right? People can report any kinds of schemes like this one, or other people that you feel are trying to rip you off. We talked about people trying to put you in a waiting line or taking money in advance for a process that's not open yet. If any of these things were to happen to folks, what should they do?
Well, the number to call ICE, especially in terms of the Immigration and Customs Enforcement scam, is 866-347-2423. And again, that's an ICE number that they're gathering this information and reports of people who are getting those calls from ICE saying, we've been told that if we pay money, they'll fix their immigration status.
Okay, cool. So let's start out talking about travel. Let me start off by saying that after looking through the list of restrictions and possible problems you could have if you travel, my advice, and I'm not a lawyer, but my advice would be just stay home. Don't do it. Don't take the chance.
Usually I go, I hate to put a damper on traveling or to make people fearful of being out in the community. But yes, I usually give, general cautions about traveling. If you're here in the U.S., even with the announcement of the DACA and the DAPA, we're still hearing inconsistent reports from different parts of the country, different parts of the state, of what immigration is doing with people who they're picking up who might be eligible for one of these programs.
Wow.
And so it's one of those two. You don't want to be picked up if you think you're eligible for this program and then have everything unwind. In terms of plane travel, again, it can be risky if you're traveling using a foreign ID, because that kind of says, hey, I'm not a U.S. citizen, so unless you're traveling with a foreign issued ID and proper immigration documents, you could just naturally cause somebody to say, hey, what's going on here?
Right. Well, and part of the advice to all undocumented people is you have to be very careful, because when you're traveling within or outside of the United States, if you're undocumented, you always run the risk of being detained and deported. But the really important thing that I got from looking at this information today was that if you're an undocumented person, you're taking those risks all the time. But right now, if you're an undocumented person with these new programs, you should be talking to somebody about whether you're eligible, because you may be taking unnecessary risks.
Yes, definitely. If you think that you qualify for the expanded DACA or the DAPA, you definitely don't want to leave the U.S. until you've gotten protection or something has happened.
Because you could literally lose your chance to apply, right?
Yes.
So there's people out there right now that are eligible for DACA or DAPA that don't know it, that might be taking a risk in losing their eligibility by traveling. This is very important for folks to know.
No, and in terms of too, and looking at whether or not you're eligible for DACA or DAPA, the other questions, and we'll go into a little bit more detail, that you have to ask yourself is, have you been ordered deported? Have you been turned away from at the border? Have you been, picked up and returned? Have, any contact where you've come to the U.S. and left, even if it's for a family trip or vacation. All of those situations are going to be specific to you and specific as to how it's going to affect your ability to get DACA or DAPA. So again, while we're in this waiting mode, now's the time to think about, or if you came to the U.S. when you were younger, ask your parents. Did we ever go back? Did any of were we ever turned away from the border? How did we get here? All of those questions are going to factor into your eligibility for some of these programs.
I had a situation where I was with an undocumented person and they had to go home because somebody died. And they were in process of doing some documentation with immigration at the time. And when they heard the person was dead, it didn't occur to them to go and check if there was any precaution that they should take. And of course, there's many precautions one should take when traveling, but when you're undocumented, you need to check into a bunch of things. Can you talk about some of those concerns?
Well, and we'll talk more about it in terms of if you currently have DACA, you can't leave the U.S. without getting permission from immigration.
You can get permission?
Well, in certain circumstances, you can get permission. But if you have that DACA status and you don't get permission to leave, and you do leave the U.S., you automatically are going to lose your DACA status.
Ouch.
And so, again, in terms of if you think that you might be eligible for the expanded DACA or the DAPA program, and you leave the U.S., and say you've been deported before, you're going to have a really hard time coming back to the U.S. and being eligible for these programs.
So you may not realize that you're not going to get back in when you're leaving the country, but when you try to come back in,
then you
could have a problem.
Yeah.
And so,
go ahead. Well, and in terms of why are we talking about travel and why is it important? And of course, one thing is if you're undocumented, there is a certain risk of traveling and whether or not you're going to be picked up or being detained by immigration. Of course, the idea of these DACA and DAPA programs is going back and focusing on who does the government really want to deport.
Right.
And again, that's one of those, the president has announced, the people who qualify for DACA or DAPA should be at the bottom of the list.
Right.
But at the same time, we're going to have that inconsistent enforcement, for now. But one of the requirements for either that DACA or DAPA program is you have to show that you've been continuously in the U.S.
Right, since certain dates. And you have to be able to show not every single day of every single month for the whole time, but you have to be able to show you were here continuously.
Yes, and so again, this is where it starts to get a little bit confusing when we talk about these different programs. For the original DACA applicants, they have to show they've been continuously in the U.S. since June 15th, 2007. Now, for the expanded DACA and the DAPA, you have to show you've been continuously present in the U.S. since January 1st, 2010. And so, as we're going through this, if the times that you've been outside the U.S. is, after that January 1st, 2010 date, then we need to be a little bit more concerned about how is that going to affect your applications.
Are there some instances where folks who have already done this, the cat's already out of the bag? We're 2015, I'm eligible for DACA, but I left the country. What do I do now?
Well, and that's again going to be on that case by case.
Am I screwed?
Well, again, it's going to be on that case by case basis. when did you travel? How long were you gone? Why did you travel? With the DACA program, with the original DACA program, immigration said if you left the U.S. and it was for a brief, casual, and innocent departure, it doesn't affect your ability to get that original DACA.
So the scenario that I gave as an example a moment ago, where this fellow left for a funeral and it didn't occur to them, they were in grief and they just went to the funeral.
Yep. And
that might be a scenario.
That might be a scenario. And again, as we're talking about this, it might not affect your ability to get DACA.
Right.
However, your traveling might affect your ability to
get back into the country.
Well, to not only get back in the country, or your ability to get your green card or other relief, down the road. So again, some of this language and terminology we're using is really specific for your eligibility, for DACA.
So the kind of travel that is probably likely to get you in trouble is what kind?
Most of the time, if your absence was because you were ordered excluded or deported, or you were removed from the U.S. If your departure from the U.S. was not voluntary, that somebody picked you up and took you across the border. Or if you left the U.S. to go and commit a crime or do any other unscrupulous activities.
Is that all the problematic travel then?
Well, and in terms of going back to, immigration has said it's okay for this brief, casual, and innocent time. However, it's more problematic for those extended time period. And unfortunately, at this point, there isn't a real, it's this number of days. Immigration again wants to see how long were you gone, what was the reason why you were gone, and were you gone just long enough to accomplish whatever. If you went back for your grandmother's funeral, they don't want you to be there for 3 months.
I can't go to the Bahamas on the way.
Yeah, no, they're gonna want to see that it's the time that you spent outside of the United States was reasonable based on your particular circumstances.
Okay, and what about issues with being deported?
Well, again, if you've been previously deported and you've been removed from the U.S. and then you leave the U.S. again and come back, one, you're probably not going to be eligible for these programs, and you're going to be at a higher risk and going to be higher up on that priority chart. And again, before and even as we get into this, if you do qualify for DACA or DAPA or any of these programs, and you have been deported or have any of these problems, you're going to want to make sure that you understand what your rights and abilities and how your leaving the U.S. is going to affect you.
Let me ask this question. Is there a certain period of time, like I know I have possible issue of travel involved in my case. Is there a period of time that the government's going to be looking at with more scrutiny if I left during that period of time?
Yeah, in terms of with these new programs, immigration's probably not going to be too concerned if you've been outside of the U.S. and traveled before that January 1st, 2010 date.
Okay.
Immigration is going to want to know and look at those times that you've been outside the U.S. between, January 1st, 2010 and to present. Now, some of those rules, because we can't apply yet, we don't know the exact answer to.
Mm-hmm.
However, we can compare it to that original DACA program. And with the original DACA program, it was immigration said if you left the U.S. between when the president announced the DACA program and when you could file for the DACA program, that if you left during that time period, you would become ineligible.
Right, that's a problem.
And so that's kind of thinking that rule is going to be with the expanded DACA and the DAPA. That's where we get you, if you think you're qualified, you don't want to leave the U.S. right now.
Obviously. Because
if that's the rule that they put in place, you're not going to be eligible.
So, if my application is pending, I really need to find out from a legal expert, somebody that's certified, or an attorney like yourself, to figure out how I can get permission, or I have to get permission.
Yep, and Right now, you can't apply for DACA and the permission to travel at the same time.
Okay.
So first you have to apply for DACA.
Okay.
And you can't travel outside the U.S. while that application is pending. Otherwise, you're going to have abandoned that DACA application, and then you're probably not going to be eligible in the future.
Oh, wow.
But if you do get that DACA, you can, after your DACA is approved, you can request what's called advance parole or advance permission to leave the U.S. and come back. However, again, based on your circumstances, you're going to want to be careful about that. And again, parole isn't admission for immigration purposes. It's just you're permitted to leave the U.S. and you're paroled back in. And so that's why it's important to visit with somebody to, what is the difference between being paroled and admitted, and how is this going to affect me? Because there is such thing as unlawful presence, which counts the days that you've been unlawfully present in the U.S., and then when you leave the U.S., you get imposed a penalty from coming back, for how long you've been here.
Wow.
But right now, immigration is saying, for the people who have DACA, if they get that advance parole and leave the U.S. and come back, they're not going to trigger that unlawful presence. However, that being said, you usually want to know what to do if immigration isn't following those rules.
Right. So, unlawful presence, you want to avoid that.
Yes, because
I would say from what you just said that you should only even ask for this parole under the most important of circumstances, because otherwise it doesn't seem like it is worth jeopardizing one's petition.
Well,
for.
and with the advance parole, you can't request the advance parole to go on a family vacation or to travel for fun.
Of course.
When you do apply for that advance parole under DACA, it has to be for a humanitarian purpose. So that goes back to, attending a family member's funeral, or maybe it's to receive medical treatment, or visiting, an ailing family member, so that there's a specific reason for you to leave the U.S.
What does that mean? Can I go to Puerto Rico? Because I know there's a lot of Latino people that are from Puerto Rico, or some territory of the United States, like Guam or.
Yep, and in terms of this goes back to even getting on a flight within the U.S. and you present them a Mexican passport, they might want to see either a visa or a green card or something else that shows your status. But, also if you're traveling to U.S. territories such as Guam, the Northern Mariana Islands, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, in many of those places you also are going to be screened through customs. Even though you're not technically leaving you're going from the U.S. to the U.S.
Right.
But many of those places have systems in place to detect and to screen people. So again, you're going to want to be careful if you're going, to those, even to the U.S. territories.
So the motto is, be very careful if you travel. If you absolutely have to travel, and especially if you're a DACA applicant already, you better get parole. And how does one go about doing that?
Well, again, going back, one of the first requirements to even get parole is you have to show immigration why you want to leave, and it has to be one of the acceptable reasons.
Is there an application or something? Or?
Well, first let's talk about what you even need to do.
Okay.
First, you can only request and file that application if it's for humanitarian reasons.
Yeah.
Or if you're with that DACA, if it's related to education. So you're doing a semester abroad, or you're doing a school-related or educational activity that requires you to leave the U.S. The third one would be, for employment purposes. So your employer is sending you overseas, or you need to go to an interview or to a conference or training or meetings or something related, to your job with somebody overseas. So first, you can't even file an application unless your travel meets one of those three areas. Then you have to file yet another immigration application to request that advance parole. And
Okay.
you get to pay another immigration fee,
How much is that?
$360. And right now, it's really
It's almost as much for the DACA.
yes. And with that advanced parole, it's really a one-time use. It's not like they're going to give you that advanced parole to come and go for an extended period of time. Right now, it's really specific to the one trip in one use.
Wow. And I have a question about that. So I have to travel. I'm going to ask for my advanced parole because my auntie is dying. And I send in the application with my $360 and then she dies. Can I get my money back? And I can't go see her now, and I just like no point even because I wanted to go visit her before she died, but now she's dead.
No, unfortunately, you can't get that money back.
So in a situation where like it's iffy and I'm not going to possibly not going to make it, it would not be advisable for me to just spend my $360 because I'm not going to get my money back.
No, you're not going to get your money back, and it's going to become a timing thing. On
Right.
average, these advanced parole applications can take up to 90 days. Now, if you can show that there's an extreme emergency, grandma's dying, there might be some ways to shorten up that length of time. But again, it's not like if you get the call today that grandma's not doing well, that you're going to be able to get on the next plane back tomorrow. That there is going to be a time period. So that, again,
That's something important to people to keep in mind, though, because a lot of things that would, the only thing I could imagine jeopardizing my application or my eligibility for one of these programs over would be an emergency. And an emergency usually means it's a timing issue. So if it's going to take 90 days for me to get parole approval, that may not be worth my time. I should just, accept the fact that it's not going to happen.
Yeah, no, and unfortunately, when it comes to some of this, some people are going to have to make that tough choice of are they going to go back and see that family member, or are they going to protect their immigration status? Or are they willing, to risk filing that application for advanced parole, spending that money, and then not being able to use it?
Well, see, that's why we're here to ask you the tough questions, because without this information, I could imagine some of our listeners going, oh, okay, well, if I have to in an emergency, I can just get the parole. But, it's not that easy either.
No, and that's when I was kind of going back to, if you're thinking that you want to leave the U.S. and you're on DACA, or you're going to get DACA, or you're going to get DAPA, that's the time you really want to go and visit with an attorney or an immigration specialist to have them sit down and say, here's what the money we're talking about. Here's how long we think it's going to take for you to get this, and here's the effect on your immigration status if you leave. Because hopefully we can help you make some of those decisions as to what choice you're going to pick.
And you're a very helpful person. I can vouch for that. How can folks get a hold of you if they want to ask you questions?
They can go ahead and call my office at 701-298-7720.
And habla español? You have someone.
Yes.
You have someone that can do it.
Yes.
Okay, so traveling outside of the United States, very, very dangerous. Consult with an attorney or somebody that's been, certified, approved to do this. Find out about whether or not you can qualify for parole if you absolutely need to stay. Go outside of the country. And make sure that you meet the timing issue for that, because otherwise it might not be worth it for you to even try to leave the country at all.
And there might be some groups of people who could benefit by leaving the U.S. and coming back.
Really?
Yes.
Tell me.
Tell you. DACA applicants who also have an immediate relative, so they're married to a U.S. citizen, or they're a child under the age of 21 of a U.S. citizen.
Okay.
They're considered immediate relatives, and they can get legal status here in the U.S. if they have a legal admission. So sometimes, individuals in the certain correct circumstances are going to be able to leave the U.S. and come back, and then they might be able to get their green card that way, because they no longer have an illegal admission, they have a legal admission. So that's another good reason why you want to visit with an immigration attorney before you leave, or even about your case, to see if you would meet this, call it, minor exception to the rule.
Wow. Okay. Are there any other DACA specific issues that people need to keep in mind when traveling?
Again, if you have had any criminal issues or criminal problems in the past, that could affect your, even if we give you even if immigration gives you advanced parole, and you have some sort of other problem, you might not.
Right. So if granting parole doesn't mean that they have expunged your criminal record and they're not going to stop you at the border and not let you enter.
Yep. And so that's one of the, usually, that advanced parole says that, yes, we're going to give you the opportunity to leave the U.S. and represent yourself to come back to the U.S.
But it doesn't take into account any criminal record that would bar you from entering the U.S.
in
the first place.
Or any of the other problems that we've talked about.
Right. So, again, just because you heard us tell you can apply for parole, you better go talk to somebody qualified to make sure you got all your ducks in a row, because there's a lot of other possible issues, lateral issues, that could affect.
Yep. And at this point, when we talk about the ability to travel and the advanced parole, right now, all we're talking about is the people that, all we can really talk about is the people who are eligible for that, the original DACA and the expanded DACA. At this point, immigration hasn't told us anything about that DAPA program, the Deferred Action for the Parents of Americans. Again, many of us...
So parents of Americans, for the time being, we don't have anything.
Well, and at this, again, it could be that there are similar, maybe slightly different, since, the DACA program has the educational requirement, so the ability to travel for education might not be one that you'd get for DAPA.
Right.
But again, DAPA might allow, again, humanitarian reasons to travel. And that's, even though you're qualified for DAPA, don't say that you automatically, you shouldn't be traveling until you get your DAPA. But we're not saying at this point that you won't be eligible to travel in the future, because at this point we just don't know what those final rules are.
Okay. So DAPA people, just try to avoid traveling if you can. DACA people, make sure you ask lots and lots of questions before you travel. Is there anything else that we left out for the restrictions on travel, or possible things that could happen to you very bad if you do travel?
Well, and again, at this point, if you think that, I can't emphasize it enough, that if you think you're eligible for these programs, you want to avoid leaving the U.S. at all costs.
Right.
And you want to make sure that if you are traveling, that you let your family members know that you're traveling, and give them your itinerary and how to get a hold of you, or that somebody knows where your papers are, so that if something does happen, and if there is a fix, or if there's a way to help, that we know, that somebody knows where the papers are and how to help you out. But again, a lot of this is not necessarily, to put fear in, but to realize that when it comes to being eligible for these programs, some of this is going to be really specific in terms of...
There's a lot of dangers, and the consequences of a mistake are pretty harsh. You can lose your eligibility, even when these programs could bring you relief from deportation. You could lose your eligibility. You could end up in deportation proceedings, separated from your family. And I think it's not fear-mongering. I think it's making sure people are fairly warned and have information so they can make decisions. And I can't emphasize enough how tricky all of this stuff is. You do need to get some legal advice, or some, expert advice from people that are trained in immigration law, which is the most complicated type of law that there is. But for folks that live here in Fargo, Moorhead, I'm going to emphasize we're going to be holding a town hall meeting, and you're going to be there.
I'm going to be there, and to the best of my ability, I'm going to try and explain where some of these tricky points are coming in, and to the ability of emphasizing where those travel issues come up and where some of the other issues about being eligible come up.
So this is a perfect opportunity for folks that are out there that have questions. They can come to the town hall meeting and they can ask you and figure out what their next steps are going to be. So I encourage folks to come out. Once again, we'll be having that town meeting on March 20th from 3 to 5 at the North Dakota Job Service Center, which is located at 1350 32nd Street South. If anybody has questions about the upcoming town hall meeting or would like more information about how to get a hold of Anna, we can contact Duke at 701-367-0403. Thanks again for listening in to today's podcast.